Hey everyone, my name is Matt Gear, and I'm a systems engineer with Cisco Meraki. What I wanted to do today was to talk to you about an automation server that I put together that allows you to do some things with the C9300s when you're looking at a migration strategy. So if you looked at my previous video about migrating C9300s to managed mode, you saw that there was a Meraki document that we used that we kind of walked through. And there were some requirements from that perspective of the document to get everything up and running. Now, with that document, right, there were some steps that we had to do from an iOS version, running some service Meraki commands. And then once the switch gets registered to the dashboard, right, we're migrating the switch from that perspective, moving it from general inventory to a network that we want. And so that's a great document, right? It definitely talks you through, what you need to get to a migrated switch. But there's some other things in the ecosystem that, as an administrator, right, we need to be concerned about. And so one of those is, the requirement in the document says that we need to be running iOS XE 170903 M3, right? And we can download that code, but that's kind of where it stops, meaning that, we have to have a pre-existing platform to be able to deploy that image from, right? And, maybe it's your local computer and you got a TFTP server up there, or, you're migrating via SFTP, something like that, right? And then on the opposite side of that, right, once we get it registered to the dashboard, what are we doing with the programming of the switch itself, right? How do we manage the ports? How are we migrating host names? Having strategies around that. And so that's why this server came to be. Is that we really want to provide, the user with a streamlined approach, cradle to grave, right? Meaning that whatever version of iOS XE you're on, we want to make sure that you get to 170903 M3 appropriately. And then once you start the migration process, if you're migrating, maybe 2 or 3 switches, that's okay. You can probably get into the dashboard and program those ports up by hand, not a problem. But what if you have a larger environment, right? What if you're dealing with 50 switches? Then we get into a situation or a scenario where, as powerful as the dashboard is, you can still very much go in there and make those changes en masse. But what this server does is it gives you the capability of actually analyzing your environment and maybe reconsidering or making some considerations around how you're approaching port management today, right? What are the resources that you have on your network, and how would you migrate those ports over, right? So what I wanted to do was actually talk about this a little bit, and then we were going to install the server. And so this video is actually part 1 of probably 2 or 3 parts. It's a lot of information, but I don't want you to get scared about that, right? What I want to do is I want to use these videos to give you a clear, concise understanding of what the server does, give you the background of it, and then we can actually get some switches migrated in the second video that we'll see here on YouTube. So this is part 1, and this talks about the server itself. This also is going to instruct you on getting the server component installed. So let me share my screen here. And we're going to talk about it right now. So this is what's called the Catalyst to Meraki deployment server. I call it the command server, or you can call it commands if you want, or you can call it CMDS, or whatever you want to call it. It's fine. But a little bit of background on it, right? So this is a Linux-based server. And what it does is it has the capabilities to function as some network services in your environment, right? So it'll run DHCP, it'll run NTP, it'll run DNS if you'd like, if you're working in an isolated environment where maybe you don't want these switches to be integrated to production. But more importantly, what it has, right, is a set of scripts that are wrapped in a dialog menu that allow you to take your Catalyst switches from, we'll say, iOS XE 16.6.2, get them migrated all the way up to 170903 M3, register those devices, claim those devices to the dashboard via API, migrate the host names over to the dashboard based on the serial number of those devices. And then it allows you to create port templates around those switches that have been migrated, right? So if you look at it, it's really more of like an orchestration server or mini orchestration server, if you will. And then encompassed with that is the capability to do a lot of after-hours scheduling if you wanted to, right? So if you have a maintenance window, we'll say on a Tuesday from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., and you're looking to do that first migration strategy, right? Maybe you're at 16.6.2 on your iOS XE software, and you need to get it to 16.12, and then you need to get it to 170903 M3, right? This server will allow you to schedule those components up so that you can get through those switches to be able to migrate them to the Meraki dashboard, right? So taking care of the iOS XE components, getting them to a standard so that we can then migrate them over to Meraki, and then obviously using the API to put some automation in there for the port deployment and getting the host names migrated, right? So just to talk about Rocky Linux real quick, right? Rocky Linux is my choice of server operating system on the Linux side. It is based on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So I've been a big Red Hat fan for years, and I continue to be. And so Rocky is, pretty much considered the uncommercial version of Red Hat. And we'll see in a little bit here on the website that they even claim to be a bug for bug duplication, if you will, of RHEL. So the server does have those scripts, and there's a combination of scripts, right? We have some expect scripts and some TCL scripts. We have some Python scripts, and then we have a lot of bash scripting on the back end to glue it all together and give you a cohesive environment to be able to work from. We talked a little bit about what it can do from an iOS XE perspective. It also provides intelligence from a Meraki perspective, meaning that there are pre-checks built into the server so that the server can guide you and let you know if the switches are truly prepared or not to be migrated. And if they're not, the server actually has some utilities that can help you in that migration process. We talked about the template creation for the switches. We talked about scheduling for after hours deployment if we need to. And then what I consider to be a pretty important one, right, is historical logging, right? So this server is going to log all of its communications between itself and any switch that you would have in the environment. And that includes the iOS XE upgrades, right? That includes any of the pre-checks that we would run on an iOS XE or pre-checks on the Meraki side, all the way up to the port deployment, right? So we have a live record, if you will, of everything that the server is doing. And above and beyond that, right, the server will collect those serial numbers for you because when we go from the 9300 to the Meraki side, right, we have a Catalyst serial number, and then we have a Meraki serial number that gets generated. So that server also takes that information and historically logs it for you so that you can then, from a documentation perspective, if you need to, put those new serial numbers into your bookkeeping, if you will, or any type of database where you're keeping track of those serial numbers. And then obviously also, right, in the Meraki dashboard, you're going to have the serial numbers from a Meraki perspective and a Catalyst perspective, but making sure that you have a copy of that as migration happens is probably a good idea, right? And so the last thing, the way that the server approaches this is that it uses what I like to call batches. So batches are just groups of IP addresses, management IP addresses that we're going to use to deploy these switches. So when we think about things relative to getting the switches set up, maybe a best approach, and everybody's environment is different, right? But maybe a best approach is, tackling these switches by subnet. So, we can grab a subnet of IP addresses, get them batched up, and get them moved over. And then when that's done, we actually run what's called a batch cleanup, where we're taking all of that information again, right? The real-time logging, we're archiving that. And then we can start our next batch, right? Which would be the next set of IP addresses or the next subnet that we would be leveraging to get those switches migrated. So enough PowerPoint. This is the first time I've done PowerPoint in a while, but I thought it was important to kind of give you a lowdown of how this works and how it approaches the challenge that we may have in the environment. So again, for this video, what we'll do is we'll actually get a server up and going, and then we'll roll into a separate part 2 video where we're actually going to migrate the switches. Okay? So with that being said, let's go ahead and get a server up and running here so you guys can see what that process looks like. Okay. So a little bit of housekeeping first, just to get you prepped, right? So the concept of this server is that we are leveraging Red Hat Enterprise, we are leveraging Rocky Linux to get the base operating system installed, right? We're going to install that in a hypervisor, very minimal requirements, maybe a 10 gig hard drive. The iOS XE images take about a gig per image. So even if you were doing a 3-step, which should be the largest image jump that you would have to make, right? That's 3 gig. Operating system is about a gig and a half after the upgrades or updates. And so then that leaves you with a pretty nice amount of space left over, right, for the deployment. You can run this on as little as 1 vCPU and 2 gig of RAM. I personally recommend to have a little more oomph behind that. So, if you wanted to do like 2 vCPU and maybe 8 gig of RAM, if you have it in your hypervisor environment, that would be great. If not, that's fine. The other thing too, right, is that because this is a hypervisor install, you got a couple different flavors that you can go with, right? Maybe because of what's going on in the world with Broadcom acquiring ESXi, maybe you're looking at Proxmox, maybe you're looking at more of a native KVM, maybe you're still running ESXi. That's fine. The operating system installs into all those environments, right? Not a problem. And in this video, I will include in the description a document that talks about the overview of the deployment of this server and how to get it installed, if you will, line by line, right? So up here under the table of contents, you can see that we have a section for installing Rocky Linux and creating the VM. I'll do that in the video also, but just know that there's documentation supporting this install, where if you need to review it for any reason, you can absolutely do that. So we talked about the we talked about the hypervisor, we talked about the operating system that is needed, and so let's talk about the application real quick. So this application is stored up in GitHub. And that's how we're going to download it and get it today. And actually, no pun intended, right? How we're going to get it today and get it installed on the server. So if I go to GitHub, I can actually jump to or search for Meraki Mat. And what that will provide is a user result on the left-hand side there. If I click on Meraki Mat, you'll see that there's a couple repositories in here, but the one that we want to take a look at is the CMDS. So if I click on CMDS and I go to this file called easy install, there's a couple lines of code in here that we can copy out, and we're going to paste that into the terminal once we get the server up and running. All right. So let's get our hands dirty. I'm going to go ahead and create a virtual machine here real quick. I'm just going to call it Meraki MIG. I'm going to install this from a local ISO. And so that ISO is my Rocky 9.4 minimal. Now you can get that if you go to rockylinux.org, and if you click on the download button over here, that'll take you to a landing page that will allow you to download the ISO. And there's a couple different flavors here. We have a DVD, a boot ISO, which literally is just like a bootstrap, and then it gets everything from the cloud. and then we have a minimal ISO. I recommend the minimal ISO. It's not too big. It's about 1 gig to download, but it has all the requirements that we need to get the server up and running, and then we can run our update from the Meraki repos to get it installed. Right. So once you get that installed, or excuse me, once you get that downloaded and you get that into your data store, you can obviously deploy your ESXi or KVM or Proxmox/KVM version of Rocky Linux. So right here, I'll go ahead and I will jump this to 8 gig. Let me go ahead and modify my network settings here real quick. All right, and I'm ready to go. So past this point, everything's going to be the same. This is the welcome screen to the Rocky Linux installer. I'm just going to go ahead and select Install Rocky Linux. And so this is a nice little GUI that comes up that allows you to walk through the steps that are needed to get Rocky Linux up and running. Now in my environment, I do have a DHCP server on this segment of the network. And so when you are installing this, you have a couple different options. You can set up a static IP address in the Rocky Linux GUI, or if you also have DHCP in your environment, you can let the server grab a DHCP address if you'd like, because what happens is when we grab the repo, when we grab the GitHub repository, one of the things that the script does is it does validate that you're not using localhost.localdomain as the name of the server, and also that you do have a static IP address. I'm going to set it up that way this morning. So if you don't have DHCP, you can go ahead and use the installer here to set that up. That's also documented in the Word document. But again, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and just use DHCP. So the first thing that we're presented with is the language that we want to install in. I'm just going to go ahead and click continue here. The couple changes that we need to make, right? So the first change here is to just specify the drive that we're going to be using. You can see there's already a check mark here. I'm not modifying anything. All I'm doing is just clicking done. Now, if the installer comes up and says that you need to reclaim space, that's okay. Just go ahead and click the reclaim space button, click the delete all button, and then you're going to reclaim the space. So you can see here that it updates itself and we are ready for our installation destination. Over here under user settings, if you click on the root password, we're going to go ahead and use the root, use these fields to provide the root password. And we are going to allow root SSH login with password. Okay, that's all we need to change here. We'll click done, and then we'll go ahead and click begin installation. So at this point, it takes probably about, I'm going to guess, 5 to 7 minutes to install the operating system. So this is just watching a progress bar run. So I'm going to pause the video here, and when this operating system is done installing, I'll go ahead and resume the video, and then we'll talk about getting the application from GitHub. All right? So I'll see you guys in a minute. Okay, and we are back. So just watching the progress bar, we are then presented with the capability here to reboot the system. So I'm going to go ahead and reboot. All right, and so we have successfully installed Rocky Linux in our virtualized environment. And at this point, we'll be prompted with the login for the server. So again, this server grabbed DHCP from my network. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to log in real quick. And I'm going to take a look at the IP address of this server. And I can see that it's sitting at 240.248. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my terminal here. I'm going to SSH into that IP address. Okay, and so now at this point, I got a couple different options, right? I can use the Word document that we were looking at a little bit earlier, or I can go straight out to GitHub to get that information. So I'll just go ahead and use the Word document. So if I go up to my table of contents here, I am going to grab the link for obtaining CMDS Easy Install. Just going to grab these couple lines here, copy them, come over to my terminal, and I'm going to paste them in. So what's going to happen is the server is going to install a couple requirements real quick, and that's going to allow it to get to the GitHub repository that we want to use. Okay, and so we are at the welcome screen, if you will. It explains to you what the installer is going to do, and it is going to then allow you to start the installation. So I'm going to go ahead and press the Enter key. Right now, we only have one option, and that's deploying CMDS. So I'm going to go ahead and press the Enter key again. And then here you can see the first thing that it does is it's going to check for that static IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and give the server an IP address here. Oops. And again, make sure that it's in CIDR format. My default gateway, the QDM for this machine, my upstream DNS server, and my search domain. Okay, and then you can see that it lets you see what we've put in there. I'm going to go ahead and press the Enter key. And so the server is going to reboot. So now all I have to do is log back in to that IP, to the new IP address. And once we log back in, the installer will automatically start again. Now again, we want to make sure that we're logging in as root. That's where the installer resides. So once we log back in, you can see that we get a secondary welcome screen, and this is more of like a checklist to let us know what we want to do here, right? So again, if we want to install network services because we're in an isolated environment, you can install, well, you can configure this server to be an NTP server, a DHCP server, and a DNS server. So just for fun, we'll go ahead and do that. So yes, I would like this to be an NTP server. And the one thing it is going to ask me is to provide a network segment that I'm going to service my clients for NTP, right? So we're running cronny on the back end of this, and we need to have that CIDR network to be able to allow clients to retrieve NTP. So I'm going to make mine pretty short here, just for the subnet that I'm in. Okay, and then the second question is, do I want to run DHCP? Yes, please. And so here we're running ISC DHCPD, so we need to have a declaration for the local interface. You can see here that based on the address that we gave the network interface, the installer is going to ask you to provide a declaration for that particular subnet, right? So the beginning IP address, we'll just put in, I don't know, 240.15, and the ending IP address, something like that, and then the net mask. Default gateway, and a description. Okay, and then the last question it's going to ask you is, do you want to run DNS? So we'll go ahead and install the DNS server here. And so this is installing the caching name server, and we do open it up to allow pretty much anybody and recursive, right? So you can see here that the server is going out and synchronizing its time, and it'll give a return status on that. We can see that we're successfully syncing time here. The next thing it's going to do is update the firewall, and it's also going to do some backend checks for SE Linux to make sure that it's up and operational, and we're going to modify it a little bit. And then at this point, the server is going to use DNF to go out and update itself. It's also going to get some Python requirements for the system, and then it will prompt you to reboot. So this takes about 5 to 7 minutes. Again, just for brevity here, I'm going to pause the video. And once we are done getting the server upgraded or updated, then I'll go ahead and reconvene. All right, so I'll see you guys in a minute. Okay, guys, and we are back. So again, hands-off installation, if you will. We just answered those 3 questions around if we wanted to enable those network services, right? So if you don't want to use the services, the network services that are included in the server, we would have just selected or pressed the N key on our keyboard to say no. And otherwise, again, it was an automated installation. So we are sitting at a prompt that says the server installation is complete, and the server will reboot now. So I'm going to go ahead and press any key to continue, and the server is going to now reboot. And all I have to do is SSH back in, again, is root. And we will be presented with the Dialog base menu, right? So we have officially installed Meraki Linux in our hypervisor environment, and we have installed the CMDS component inside of that, right? So we're ready to rock and roll to start migrating switches. So I do appreciate your time. I hope this was a good use of your time. I'm glad that you're watching this, especially if you're interested in migrating C9300s to the Meraki dashboard. And so in part 2, we're going to start going over the content of this menu, and we're going to get some switches migrated from an earlier version of iOS XE up to 1709.03M3, which is what we need for the Meraki migration. We'll get those switches migrated, and you guys will be able to see what that looks like in detail. So again, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much, and please come back for part 2 so you can see what we're actually going to do with this menu. All right. Hope everybody has a great day, great evening, great morning, whenever you're watching this, and talk to you soon.